On Capitol Hill today, the Justice Department, as it really exists for those of us here on Earth 1, came crashing up against the fictitious alternate reality of a supposedly weaponized Justice Department, the one of Earth 2, on which today's Republican Party lives. Attorney General Merrick Garland was before the House Judiciary Committee, which is, of course, chaired by Ohio Republican Jim Jordan. In his opening remarks, Garland reiterated the independence of the Justice Department.
Our job is not to take orders from the president, from Congress, or from anyone else about who or what to criminally investigate. As the president himself has said, and I reaffirm today, I am not the president's lawyer. I will add, I am not Congress's prosecutor.
Now over to the news on Earth 2. Republicans made it clear even before the hearing started, with members telling reporters that nothing Merrick Garland could or would say today was going to satisfy them, that they would peddle all sorts of conspiracy theories. Republicans accusing the Justice Department of going easy on President Joe Biden's son, Hunter, who currently faces a rarely used and constitutionally questionable gun charge. It was brought by a Trump-appointed prosecutor who was given special counsel status by, wait for it, Merrick Garland. But the fix is in, is what Jim Jordan had to say, even as Garland said over and over and over again that there was no interference in the Hunter Biden case.
Has anyone from the White House provided direction at any time to you personally or to any senior officials at the DOJ regarding how the Hunter Biden investigation was to be carried out?
No. I'm going to say again, the determination of where to bring cases and which kinds of cases to bring was left to Mr. Weiss. This investigation was being conducted by Mr. Weiss, an appointee of President Trump. You will, at the appropriate time, have the opportunity to ask Mr. Weiss that question.
That declarative, definitive answer wasn't enough for Republicans. One Republican member went so far as to suggest that Merrick Garland should be held in contempt of Congress. In response, here's what a Democratic member of the committee, Congressman Eric Swalwell, had to say.
That is quite rich, because the guy who's leaving the hearing room right now, Mr. Jordan, is about 500 days into evading his subpoena. About 500 days. So if we're going to talk about contempt of Congress, let's get real. I mean, are you serious that Jim Jordan, a witness to one of the greatest crimes ever committed in America, a crime where more prosecutions have occurred than any crime committed in America, refuses to help his country, and we're going to get lectured about subpoena compliance and contempt of Congress? Jim Jordan won't even honor a lawful subpoena? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? There's no credibility on that side.
Merrick Garland also had to swat down right-wing conspiracy theories, including the notion that DOJ is targeting people of faith.
Attorney General, through the chair, I ask you, do you agree that traditional Catholics are violent extremists?
I have no idea what the traditional means here.
Catholics that go to church.
May I answer your question?
Yes or no?
The idea that someone with my family background would discriminate against any religion is so outrageous, so absurd.
Mr. Attorney General, it was your FBI that...
The gap between life on Earth 1 and life on Earth 2 on full, glorious display today at a hearing about the Justice Department on Capitol Hill is where we begin with some of our most favorite reporters and friends. From the New York Times, Washington correspondent Mike Schmidt is with us. Also joining us, former acting assistant attorney general for national security at the U.S. Department of Justice, Mary McCord, is here. With me at the table, former chief spokesman for DOJ and former senior advisor to AG Garland, who is bursting with analysis, Anthony Coley's here, and former top State Department official during the Obama administration, MSNBC political analyst Rick Stengel's here for the hour. Anthony, the floor is yours.
So this was spicy Garland, and I'm glad the public got a chance to see that. This is what we call him when he show up at these types of meetings at DOJ. What was so important here is that I think what animated him the most are these attacks against DOJ prosecutors and agents. Nicole, I remember when I was at DOJ, there were two two moments in particular that moved the Attorney General. The first was when he had a phone call with the family of George Floyd after that first federal indictment. But the second concerned a conversation about the security of DOJ personnel. And what we've seen in recent months since I've left is even an increase in uptick of those threats, and not just against prosecutors and agents themselves, but also their families. So what we saw today, I think, was an Attorney General that was frustrated, really, with the downstream impact of these spurless charges from Republicans.
So you put it on the table, Spicy Garland. I think my gut might have been to call that an oxymoron, but I'm going to let you prove your case. Let me show some of this. This was Attorney General Merrick Garland being asked by Congressman Nadler about the dangers of defunding the Justice Department. Let me play this first.
Defunding the FBI would leave the United States naked to the malign influence of the Chinese Communist Party, to the attacks by Iranians on American citizens and attempts to assassinate former officials, to the Russian aggression, to North Korean cyber attacks, to violent crime in the United States, which the FBI helps to fight against, to all kinds of espionage, to domestic violent extremists who have attacked our churches, our synagogues, our mosques, and who have killed individuals out of racial hatred. I cannot imagine the consequences of defunding the FBI, but they would be catastrophic.
Pretty straight talk there.
Really straight talk. And in many ways, what we saw were different conversations, Nicole. These people were talking past each other. What Richard Stengel and I were talking about earlier is that in many senses, in one sense, you have the Attorney General talking about criminal investigations, not just in this clip, but throughout the hearing. Criminal investigations begin with facts, and the facts tell prosecutors where to go. What we see on Capitol Hill are quite different with political investigations. With political investigations, members of Congress start with the end in mind, and then they try to fill in the facts to prove their narrative. And so that's what we saw throughout this hearing. We saw crazy things, crazy notions of Republicans suggesting that defunding the FBI is the right way to go. But none of this is the appropriate conversation that this country should be having right now.
Well, it's not the conversation that the whole country's having, Mary McCord. It's the conversation happening on Earth 2, which is where the MAGA Republicans live. I want to show you a little bit more about what Merrick Garland had to say about who the real victims are of this deep state conspiracy.
Does the rhetoric regarding the Biden case have any basis in reality?
No, it does not.
How does this impact FBI and DOJ employees' ability to do their work? I think you mentioned specifically FBI and DOJ employees.
As I've already said, the agents of the FBI and the prosecutors understand that criticism comes with their job, and they will continue to do their jobs without fear or favor. But the idea of threatening their safety or that of their families is just abhorrent.
And yet, Mary, that's where we are, with an unprecedented threat level under which FBI agents are working. Those working on the Hunter Biden case have a unit that has been erected inside the FBI to protect the FBI from those threats. An unprecedented threat level against NARA, against the IRS, against DOJ, and an unprecedented amount of money being spent by members of Congress to protect them from these threats. What did you make of this part of the hearing today?
So I had two takeaways. One is that, and we've talked about this before, I mean, this used to be the party of law and order, right? Respect for the FBI, respect for the Department of Justice, respect for the rule of law. And that just seems to be out the window. But maybe even more startling than that is the types of questions and the types of rhetoric-filled dialogue that many on the Republican side of this committee were directing, those questions they were directing to Merrick Garland, many weren't even questions at all. They're just rhetoric and commentary. They sound so much like what I see from researchers who spend their time in the online extremist milieu.
Wow.
Conspiracy theories, nods to violence, of course, on those online, in that online space, the talk about violence is much more direct than some of what we saw here. But it's almost like the members of Congress are just careful enough to stop right before that last sentence or that last phrase directing violence. But everything that is animating extremists online and agitating them toward violence and saying things that are very, very clearly threatening and violent, it's the same thing you're hearing here. You know, conspiracies about the Hunter Biden investigation, conspiracies about the Trump investigation, you know, conspiracies about the FBI staging January 6th. It's just lies, and it is just of a piece. If you could put these things side by side, the kinds of things that get sent to me, like I said, from online researchers in these forums that most of us have never even heard of before, unless you do this kind of work, it's the same thing you're hearing from people like Jim Jordan.